Hey, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about breaking down barriers in game discovery. So many great games go unnoticed due to a lot of different factors, but one of the main areas studios and developers struggle with is nailing down discoverability. So today, we're going to tackle this problem by understanding issues with the current game discovery system and discuss practical solutions to fix it, so you can break down barriers in game discovery and stand out. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey, everybody, and we're back. And today with us, I have Ichiro Lambe. Ichiro, how's it going, bud? And thanks for being on the show.
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Excellent, excellent. Now, folks, for those of you who don't know, Ichiro is the Chief Executive Officer at Totally Human Media. And you've been in games for a while. You founded, the Joban?
Yep, Dejoban Games a quarter century ago.
And I mean, you guys created like award-winning games across desktop, mobile, console, you guys done everything in games, within that studio. You moonlit at Valve to help develop Steam Labs, which is awesome. Gameplay design consultant for Lightboxer, which was developing a punching game. Go appropriate name there.
Yeah, think Dance Dance Revolution, except you're punching stuff. It was pretty awesome.
I love it. And then co-founded Worlds Apart Productions, to create early online worlds, which sounds so cool. You've done a lot of other things, but real quick, I'm just curious, what is Totally Human Media?
So the biggest problem, I think, for game developers and gamers and publishers right now is that we can't find each other. It's like we need Tinder or something like that for gamers to find games. There are, on Steam alone, over 100 million gamers, and we're closing in on about 100,000 games. And so many of these games are really highly rated by players, but they are not showing up in reviews and streams and on social media. And what I want to do is make sure that gamers who love whatever niche, whatever interest, is able to find exactly the games that they like. That's what Totally Human Media is.
That is awesome. And I'm sure sound is like music to everybody's ears listening today. And don't worry, folks, as you know from the intro, we're going to get into this a bit more in a moment. But again, so all exciting stuff. And, with your expertise, with your experience, I mean, everything from, being an award-winning game developer, lots of accolades, 30 years in the industry, mentoring, advising, and doing all sorts of those things. I'm sure this is going to be compiled and amplified in our discussion that we're going to have in a moment. But before we do that, I would love for you to go into the Q-Box round. And folks, for those of you who aren't familiar, the Q-Box round is just a series of a few random questions I prepared here today for Ichiro. So, Ichiro, are you ready for the Q-Box round?
I sure am.
Excellent. So, first up is, what's the most common mistake you see devs or studios make with their games?
Game development is a wonderful, long, terrific, terrifying, but mostly long process where you're developing a game over 9, 18, 24, 36 months. And I guess I would say that the biggest mistake I see studios and individuals make is really, if you are going to put a game into the market, if you're doing it commercially, not vetting the initial concept and jumping into production too quickly. So this is heartbreaking, and I've done it before, and I've done it to my teams, where we think, we have this great idea and we like the idea and we're like, you know what, let's run with it. And then 24 months later, we have a game that we're proud of, but really just doesn't hit the market, right? And I think it's it's a fault of our system right now where we, like you really have to pay attention to uh, what's viable on various platforms. So, if you were to do like a premium title on mobile that's this great long adventure and you put it out there, that's probably not right for that market. And if you were to do a puzzle platformer, as I say, a Metroidvania platformer on Steam, you really have to hit the high notes that Animal Well hits. So I think, if you look at the game, what is it, Kingmakers? I don't know if it's singular or plural. It's that one where it's essentially Mountain Blade, but you have a pickup truck and Apache helicopter. Not all games have to be quite as high concept, but it's worth thinking about, what am I creating? Are people going to actually want it? Is it worth getting over all the other games out there?
Love it. Such great points there. All right, next. What one habit you have that has contributed to your success?
I have to credit my I went salsa dancing back about like 15 years ago. I said, what is the most terrifying thing that I could do? And that was salsa dancing, more than 15 years ago. My goodness, time flies, almost 20 years ago at this point. And that put me in front of a bunch of people, and I had to really be able to converse with them and also execute dance moves and learn dance moves. And that prepared me for networking and public speaking. And I would say that like networking and just getting to know everyone and communicating what I'm doing and what's interesting about that has given me about like half of any of my success in biz is because of that. And the other half, of course, actually doing stuff. So talking to people.
I love it. And such a great point there too. And I love how you opened that it derived from salsa, salsa dancing. So good stuff there. All right. Last and but not least, and the staple here on the show, folks, is what game are you playing now?
My gosh, I've been trying to play so many games and I keep sort of sliding off of them in favor of Polytopia. I have a 5-month-old child who is not sleeping through the night. So I'm kind of like, my brain isn't at its best. So I like something comforting. I did Balatro for a while, and that was, quick rounds, but like Polytopia is easy to just start up and I play through a round and then the baby cries and I'm like, you know what? I've pretty much won anyway, and I can sort of slide into childcare.
I love that. And actually, I'm trying to, is Polytopia, is that a kind of like a puzzle game?
Oh, that one. So imagine Civilization, except like Fisher Price Civilization, where you play rounds of taking over the world in about 20 minutes.
Okay. So sorry. I there's another game that came to mind that I think has either a similar Utopia, but anyways, that sounds like, the perfect fix in your very brief moments of downtime when you're not tending to a 5-month-old. And I'm sure some of us can relate. I know I definitely can, going through that stage. So kudos to you for still making that time to play some games.
Thank you.
All right. Well, Ichiro, thank you so much for diving in a little bit more, and so we can learn about you. But now let's get right to the heart of this conversation, what we're all here for today, which is breaking down barriers in game discovery. Because folks, let's face it, as Ichiro mentioned in terms of kind of his mission and what he's doing with his company, this is a big deal that all of us are facing, whether it's affecting you directly as a developer or studio, or people like Ichiro, or even myself as a marketer. Game discovery is so important. So to kick off this conversation, Ichiro, what do you consider the most glaring issues with the current game discovery system?
Well, since we're talking to and about and with game developers, I'm going to take the game developers side of this. And that is to say that game dev studios are needlessly going out of business. There are these great platforms. We have, the consoles, we have mobile, we have the, Oculus store and of course, my personal favorite is Steam. And like more games are showing up on them than ever before. However, we're finding that still most of the games that pop up on these platforms, even if they're really well rated, are not reaching people. Most of the words spoken by streamers, most of the I don't know, we still use ink to write articles. Penned by journalists, most of the social media coverage is going to a very small number of games, and it's not because there are only a few amazing games. It's because attention tends to pool, to what is the term I'm looking for? Concentrate. There we go. And therefore, attention is paid to a small number of games. A lot of other games are not paid attention to. Game developers do not reach their ideal audience, and bam, we see layoffs. We see studios go out of business. I don't think that's great for the ecosystem.
Yeah. So the most glaring thing is just, there's just no real, what's the way to put it? Not necessarily rhyme or reason or either method or process or just things out there happening where, these games are getting the kind of the attention they deserve, it sounds like. And let's face it, folks, there's lots of other factors that are at play for this, but it sounds like there just needs to be some, common ground here, some process or something that we can kind of all come together with and to make that happen. So why don't we get into this a little bit more, and let's even explore further, the current state of game discovery, because I know a lot, like at face value, some people might interpret this in different ways, whether it's directly relating to a platform. Hey, why can't we get more discoverability on this platform? Or is it, other factors? So I'm just curious, from some of the things you just laid out, in your opinion, what are the most critical shortcomings of current game discovery platforms? Because that's a big one, I'm sure, for a lot of us listening today.
Sure. Now, I want to make a distinction between the discovery mechanisms and the platforms, and sometimes they are the same thing. So, I'll focus on Steam since I did some work over at Valve on that platform, and a lot of people, they learn about games on Steam during a sale, and Valve does a really good job of trying to make sure that discovery is democratized. So they have things like Next Fest. They'll try to figure out, okay, based on your library, what games, big and small, are trying to what fits with your aesthetic and interest. But really, if you're a game developer, you might be familiar with the sales funnel, where it's a metaphor for people here. Top of the funnel, people hear about your game and they go through the sales process of oh, I want to hear about it. I'm learning about it. I'm making a decision. At the bottom of the funnel is the actual purchase. Platforms are generally at the bottom of that sales funnel. They generally do not want to be the places where gamers find out about games. And like Valve has actually said this, they're like, we will amplify your message if you come in with an audience, but we want your gamers, your fans, to find out about you on social media, streamers, gaming news sites, and so forth and so on. So I think, then the same thing is true of, if you go through the Nintendo eShop, it really is not a place you just can comfortably browse. And I actually did this a month ago with my brother-in-law. We went through the entire eShop, and it was very difficult to find out about games. We had to okay, go down to the next one. Okay, go into the interface. Okay, go, if you've ever been to an IKEA, they have the showroom part of the IKEA, which is all laid out nicely. And you see 15 billion spatulas, except they're all in different rooms and, laid out beautifully. And that's what I think a platform could be doing. But generally speaking, they don't want to do that. They don't need to do that financially, and therefore they don't. So I would say most critical shortcoming is that they don't need to build that IKEA showroom.
Yeah, but I mean, it's a good point. And I think a good message from what you just shared there is, is really understanding the intent. So, of these platforms, of these distribution centers, or whatever you want to call it, showrooms, um, what is really their intent and purpose, and how are they set up and established? Because it seems that sometimes we know that there are discoverability features there, and as you called out, Valve will Steam will, do their thing to recognize those things in certain capacities, and they have events and things like that. But otherwise, their intent is to, make sales, sell games, and provide the a means for people to do that and to make those purchases. So, understanding the intent is really important, especially when it applies to game discoverability, because I think that really helps clarify things too.
Yeah, I like, a platform can't be all things and it shouldn't necessarily be all things. And like, I don't want to rag on Steam. I think Steam could and should be better for top of funnel, but it doesn't really need to be, in part because there's YouTube out there. There's Polygon. There's, Twitter talking, or X talking about all these games. And therefore the platform, like, most platforms are really focusing on giving the player a good experience. Can you find the game? Can you buy it? Can you download? Can you play it with your friends? And like, they do a really great job of that.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And again, it really comes down to what is the intent of, Steam? What is the intent of whatever platform you're on? And understanding that can make all the difference. But it also, I'm sure, creates some challenges, right? So in keeping that in mind, how would you say that these challenges, impact, both developers, but also players? And can you share your perspective on why this issue still persists in the gaming industry?
So there was a study done about 20 years ago, and I hope I'm not going to mangle this, but it was about the music industry. And researchers did a thing where they did this experiment where they took about, what is it, like 11,000 people, and they split them up into a number of, like, quote unquote worlds of music, where everybody had I call it like a Spotify type interface to music, and they could find music. And in most cases, they could say, "Hey, I listened to this," and maybe they could rate it. I don't remember. Uh, in So you had these kind of like discrete universes, worlds, where people would kind of be able to see what other people were doing. And in every world, for the most part, the really, really bad songs nobody ended up really listening to, or rating highly. And the really, really good songs, they tended to bubble up. But for the ones that were just, great songs, good songs, some ended up being hits in some of these universes, and others ended up being hits in other universes. And there was just no way to predict which ones would do well in which. So it had to do with initial starting conditions for many of these. And I think that's the problem that we have in games. Like, attention accumulates. So if you are a streamer and you need to make a living streaming, you are probably not going to be able to do it if you are covering only, I don't know, roguelike chess games. Not just because that there are few of them, but there are few fans of these things. So you tend to have streamers that are trying to get the biggest audience, and the same is true of journalism, right? So, like Polygon, I think my best example of I don't know, like trying to hit the most number of eyeballs is this article they did once on the 20 sexiest Disney cartoon characters. And okay, that's fun, and it's like, it's good to have fun. However, they did that instead of featuring an article on, an indie game that could have used the attention. And that's because they're incentivized to do that for the clicks. I mean, like, they literally cannot stay in business otherwise. So the, mass market stuff like that really just needs to cover the stuff that is likely to draw eyeballs, and therefore stuff that gets attention tends to command more attention, and everything else loses out.
Yeah, you provided some really interesting examples there in terms of like, hey, there's lots of things going on and not just in this industry, but in other industries too, kind of having a similar situation. But I think the one thing that you called out that's most important really is to be mindful of attention accumulates. And it goes both ways. So that's the same for maybe why Polygon did the top 20 sexiest Disney characters, right? Because through that attention, it can accumulate into probably other formats or other ways that are, in line with their goals and objectives. But the same goes for, developers too, where you make other initiatives, other efforts, and that attention will accumulate. And I think what's one thing that popped into my mind as you were talking is there's no overnight successes. And I know we all know that, but to drill into that point more, it's if you take a few forms of action or do a few activities, whatever, to get out there, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to now happen right away because you did something. Because I know oftentimes, and I'm sure we all feel like this, we do a lot of work. We put our names out there, we put our stuff out there, and then we feel like we should get way more because of how much energy and effort it took. But then the result is it was just a drop in the ocean. But so that's why I love what you called out to there is attention accumulates. And I think we forget that because I don't know, there's any number of things going on or it's overwhelming or just hard work. And there's a lot, but attention accumulates.
Yeah, I think that's like part of my work for the new company, and the company is Totally Human Media. The initiative is We Love Every Game, so we love everygame.com. And that will, that's it's a website, it's YouTube videos, it's newsletters, and so forth and so on. My hypothesis is that it shouldn't be that difficult. I don't think it should be tough to market your game. I think you should be able to put it out there and get to every single gamer who would love it. And the reason why it's so difficult is that platforms tend to, they want to support every game. Like literally, it is in their best interest to support every single game they can because they make money off of the sort of like the integral of all sales over games. Whereas media, social media, streamers, news publications, they get the most money per unit effort and per dollar in by covering the stuff that's the hits, and therefore they're disincentivized to cover that breadth of stuff. So, like, can we democratize the media coverage so that if you're interested in games about I don't know, gladiatorial RPG management is a thing, then you just you have your own place for that.
Yeah, no, great points there. And as we're talking about this, I'm thinking a little bit more, and about this process, about these things we're seeing. And could you maybe elaborate on, let's say, some of the main reasons why many great games still remain undiscovered? And I know we alluded to this earlier, or mentioned it, but this is what I'm really curious about. Do developers have any responsibility in this matter? Because, let's face it, there's these platforms, there's these means, but what responsibilities do developers have to get discovered?
Devs and publishers have the deck stacked against them just because of the way that I don't want to say capitalism. I'm going to say capitalism because of the way things work, because of the way attention economy works, right? If you believe the hypothesis that attention accumulates, then obviously people are going to have a really fat long tail there. I think that the the big problem really is that we don't have that long tail for niches. If you're interested in chess-based fighting games, which I learned yesterday was a thing, there's a fighting game in the Steam fighting game sale that is about chess.
Oh, I think I know that one.
Yeah. So like I don't think developers should really need to be great marketers. I think they should create wonderful things. And I believe that these systems should amplify those and get them to reach the right audiences. Like indies especially do such a great job of talking about their games and figuring out what resonates. And the saddest thing that I've heard recently is, I'm like, boy, wouldn't it be great if every developer had an interview, if they could talk somewhere about their game and their studio and their story. And the response I got from somebody is like, yeah, that's great, but who cares? Like, who cares? I don't know. I think that's heartbreaking, and I think that's unnecessary because every game, quality game should have its fans, and it doesn't.
Yeah, and I think one thing you brought up that I'm curious about too is, I mean, missing that long tail, like in terms of like niches. So is it something of like, because we know that developers, I would say, for the most part, are pretty dialed in, know what they're doing, have the reasons or motivations behind the project. But is there another factor in terms of what that long tail could be, or maybe how that connects with, the right audience? Because like you called out, there's a, chess-based fighting game, right? Is that a potential maybe missing link where, hey, we got this great idea, let's run with it, and then it's like, but who really likes it? Or is there something else?
Yeah, so I do think that you need to think about the developer or publisher needs to think about what is marketable, what do people want, and if you want, I don't think there's a huge hunger for like Infocom style text adventures these days, which is a pity because I used to like those back in the days, but that was almost 40 years ago at this point. But like if you're creating a game, I do believe that if there is a situation in the future after you launch it, anybody says, oh my gosh, this has been out for 5 years. This is my jam. How have I not heard about it? That's a systemic problem. That is a discovery problem that we should be able to solve. I think that the solution to it is twofold. One, just simply, well, maybe threefold. One, getting coverage of it, right? I mean, if the only place that really covers it is your website and the Steam store page, the gamers that want your chess-based fighting game aren't necessarily going to know to go to your website, and B, the Steam store page or the Nintendo game pages and so forth and so on, they're not meant to be your first time ambassador to the game. They're there to sort of confirm for you, yep, this is that game I want. Oh, it looks good. Okay, I'm going to buy it. Bottom of funnel right there. So part one is creating that coverage and making it look authentically good. And then two, I would say giving gamers a way to sort of connect to those. Because right now, if I'm interested in a particular game or genre of games, and I go onto a streamer that covers that genre, or I go to a website that covers that genre, I might not find all of the lesser known games, right? I'm like the ones that have 100 reviews, 95%, just they're probably not going to be covered. So figuring out a way to connect gamers to all of those games that are in their kind of like in their interest. And then the third, giving a sort of like, I call it a way to porously talk about multiple games and multiple genres. So if you get to to Reddit, they have a number of subreddits that are interesting and specific, but there isn't necessarily a bunch of crosstalk between them, even if genres are adjacent. So you can't necessarily find out about adjacent genre games in those. So I think giving people a place to talk about games and games that are kind of like similar to other games would be I don't know. That would certainly surface a lot of titles that we're not hearing about.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great point. And it's funny, as you were saying that, and unfortunately, folks, I forget the title of this. There is a site out there where it's like a central hub where players are coming together and they're talking about their current lineup of games they're playing. And they're also saying games that they highly recommend. And it's just a kind of open, from what I understand, open, almost form based like community where there's lots of exchange of information, like what you just talked about. So things like that are happening, but still, it still makes it a challenge, and really drilling down these understandings and getting the game in front of the people that want to play it and such.
Sure. I think the important part is to have all three of these pieces in place,
Exactly.
right? I mean, if you have like people can talk about a game in a forum and that's great, but then that information gets lost in a thread or in like
Yes. Yep.
50 messages down in a discussion. I think that there need to be artifacts created about every game, like little bits of video, roundups that people can refer back to, and they can bounce back before between those artifacts and the conversation and the developer interviews and so forth and so on. So my hypothesis is that if we put all of this into one place with a recommendation engine, we'll just kind of like get people naturally knowing about more games and talking about more games that they like.
Yeah. No. And that sounds like kind of a cool and exciting thing, to see. And it brings up a good area that I want to get into too, in terms of innovative solutions and kind of the future direction of discoverability. So what you just called out to a moment ago sounds like it could be, a form of technology, if you will, to put a label on it. But what would you say, in addition to that, are some other innovative strategies that can be employed to improve game discoverability?
I think coverage, just generating media around games that don't quote unquote deserve to be covered right now, right? I mean, like, and I'm using the term sort of, tongue in cheek. What quote unquote gets deserved. That deserves to get covered is the stuff that's getting the attention and is likely to get more attention. But what really deserves to get covered is everything, in my opinion. Anything that's not I don't know, maybe an asset store flip, maybe that's kind of like low effort, and maybe nobody has an audience for that. But why aren't there developer interviews for every developer? It's because not every mass. It's not quote unquote worth it to interview every developer. But I think that if we were to create that coverage, if somehow I'm just going to show my hand here, if we can use a little bit of automation to make sure that every game gets talked about, every game gets in a roundup, every developer gets an interview, and we see a bunch of these developers on games grouped by genre side by side, then we can spark the human conversation around them. Because right now there really isn't that seed for everybody to gather around. So one of the initiatives we're doing is for We Love Every Game, we have a YouTube channel, and there are 3 automated shows, and there's a little bit of human love and a little bit of automation each one. And I think it's the Monday show is Hits and Hidden Gems with Untextured Cube John Tadpole. And John Tadpole picks out a bunch of quote unquote hidden gems that are, games that are highly rated, but maybe don't have many ratings. And it says, okay, here's the trailer. And we're going to talk about why do these 50 players who gave it a positive review love this game? And it'll do that every week. And on Wednesday, we have, Steam Deck picks with Legally Distinct Robot. And Fridays, we have, I think $5 games on sale with Asset Store Bear. And they're just, all of those are trying to pick out these games that have little to no coverage. They never get a Metacritic review. They never get a streamer talking about them and surfacing them so that there can have that human conversation about them. So TLDR, democratized coverage as a start.
Yeah, I absolutely love that concept and idea. And you're right. A lot of the uh, mediums, the facets, the avenues that we're able to get some form of attention, discoverability, are singular in a lot of ways, or one-offs, if you will. So like event coverage, it's like, hey, we got this event, but then it's a matter of, did you get in? um and then it's a matter of, okay, you got in, but now it's just this one period of time. It could be an hour, it could be a week, but then that's it until the next thing. So it's like it's a lot of these peaks. And if you think about it, we all are aware, I would assume, that the importance of time, especially the player's time, and there's various factors what can contribute to how much or little time they have. And if we only are in an environment where those types of let's say events right now exist in a very short period of time, and maybe they might be pre-recorded, but it doesn't necessarily promote proper discoverability in terms of how you described it, which I think is great, because it is, like we led in with before, a kind of a systematic problem. And the understanding the intent or the players a little bit more, that discoverability doesn't necessarily align with them and their needs, right? So I love the example you just provided with one of your initiatives, because it's like, hey, this is ongoing, and things, and like you said, democratizing, but not so much in a can't find the word here. It's more so as a better mechanism to get in front of the people that want this content, that need this content and such. So uh just love that approach. So and I it sounds like then a lot of your experience then with startups, with the studios and everything else that you've done is really kind of shaping this approach for better discoverability. So with that in mind, like with this initiative, with what and your past experience, and understanding the problem that we all face as game creators, what would you believe is the future direction of game discovery, and how can the industry collectively work towards achieving it?
Okay, so I mean, I think there are two possible timelines. Uh, one timeline is one where attention further consolidates and the hits get hittier, and the miss. I hate using the word misses, but everything else misses out. Right? We had that article, that study that says that the top 10 games on Steam last year, the top 10 new launches of 2023 commanded 61% of revenue among all games. That's like not just the top 10% of games, the top 10 games. And say what you will about, okay, well, Baldur's Gate 3 was there and that was a banger, and therefore that got a bunch of money. That those 10 games garnered a lot of the attention, and the number of games that are making 61% of the revenue is, or the percent is shrinking each year, right? I mean, if you look at that graph, and I apologize for not remembering the source of that, but like there's a graph where it's like, okay, how much of the revenue do those top 10 games of any year garner on Steam every year? And that number is going up. So that's one timeline, and I don't want to put the blame on the big game companies. I don't want to put the game on the blame on the platform here. I think the system could be better, and that's timeline number two, where we figure out a way. Hopefully, this is what I'm working on, to democratize this coverage of great games, to make sure that there's media created about them, to make sure that it is possible for there to be sort of niche titles that survive, and therefore, not every game is going to make everybody a millionaire. Maybe we can see fewer and fewer of these game development studios going out of business.
Yeah, no, I love what you led in there earlier, because it really, it might not be the picture we want to see or hear, or talk about, right? But I mean, let's face it, folks. I'm sure most of you are familiar with Pareto principle, basically the 80-20 rule, right?
Exactly.
The 80-20 rule, if you think about it, it's not so much the 80-20 rule. It's more like the 90-10 rule, the 95 5% rule, right? And it's more and more going in that direction. So if we know that, and the example you provided was great too. The top 10 made up for 60%. And even if it's a give or take there, that still makes the point very clear. And under those circumstances, then how do we compete? How do we do things? And well, one, the initiatives that you're working on, which is great, but also I think it feeds into something else where whenever these other solutions are available and hopefully collectively more solutions like this happen, but until then, and even when they arrive and can be utilized and adapted across the industry, it still points a point where it comes down to media. So I'm going to go back then, I guess, and reference that other point you made earlier. Attention accumulates, but how are you going to accumulate attention if there's not stuff out there? If there's
Right.
not that word, that awareness being done? And I guess what it comes down to is, making sure that it's getting out there. It's not going to guarantee success, but it can help put you on the path towards it. At least that's my thoughts. Any other thoughts on that? On those remarks in terms of just getting out there. We know the path. We know what we're faced with, but how do we combat it now? And it sounds like just do it. Just do more. And I hate saying do more because I think that could be counterintuitive in some ways. But I don't know. Those are my initial thoughts. How about yours?
I think you're absolutely right. So, honestly, we're going to try to make sure that everybody gets more coverage. We're going to try to make sure that if you, as a gamer, could possibly love a game, you hear about it. Because, like I said, my worst thing, the thing that I just breaks my heart is a studio, an indie studio, especially puts out a game, and it doesn't do well, doesn't gain traction, and they may, maybe they go out of business, maybe the developers scatter to the wind, and then, a few years later, a bunch of gamers are like, oh my God, this is perfect for me. How come I never heard it before? We want to solve that problem.
Love it. Absolutely love it. Well, Ichiro, I know we're coming on time here. So, man, we discussed so much today in this time we had together. So, of the topics we covered, are there any tips, suggestions, or recommendations you'd make for people listening today?
Sure. I guess you had me come up with three. I came up with three.
All right.
So I'm going to say, number one, spend more time in ideation and prototyping. It is clearer than production. Even before you go into a 3-month prototype, how can you vet that idea, right? That's a quarter of a year that you're putting into that. I think that we should be making our ideas work for us better, and how to do that. Other people can tell you that, and that's a longer conversation. Number two, I would say, we talked about networking. If you're a dev, you should talk to as many people as you can, as often as you can. I don't like traveling to conferences. It's disruptive, but I do that, and I think you should do that if you can. Or, my goodness, networking online is so much easier now than it was when I first started, and we all did it over text. So, one or the other, talk to many, many people, and game developers are friendly and gregarious. And the third one is be aware of how the sales funnel works. And I think we as an industry should be more demanding of the top of that funnel. We should demand of the system that more games get representation and ink spilled and video made and words written and spoken about them.
Absolutely love those points. Again, folks, vet your ideas because, like you said, Ichiro, it's cheaper than production. And, understand your funnel. It's so important. And also talk to people, network. And yes, it can be a little scary, but it's nowhere near as scary now with how accessible you can be to others online. So, love those points. Thank you so much for sharing them. And last but not least, I mean, before we go, I'd love for you to share, some links. Do you have any websites? Where can people connect with you? Please give us some juicy links that we could use.
Sure. The big one right now is weloveeverygame.com. That's our new initiative. And I know that you on your site will have my LinkedIn and my X profiles as well.
Yep. So, folks, if you want to connect, reach out to Ichiro and, maybe talk some more about discoverability or other things that they're working on. Those will be in the show notes. Ichiro's on LinkedIn, X, as he mentioned. And just go and connect there. So, Ichiro, can't thank you enough for being here today and really diving deep with, what we're currently facing with game discovery and some ideas on how to combat that. So thanks for your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Hey, everyone. Thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.